Hey, Noah.
Hey, Micah.
What was it like to be on that boat for so long?
It took a good bit of patience. What kept us focused was the great opportunity we had to hit the reset button, but we missed a chance to build an equitable society from the ground up.
Well, I humbly appreciate the nod to justice and compassion, Noah.
Congregation Micah is a partner with the real Noah. That's Nashville Organized for Action and Hope, an anti-racist, faith-based coalition that is multiracial, multi-generational, and interfaith. It's comprised of congregations like ours that care about justice and community organizations that work to amplify the power of ordinary people.
The kinds of issues we're talking about are affordable housing, economic equity, criminal justice, education, and voter engagement.
We hope you, our membership, will join us in working for a better Nashville.
We're going to welcome everybody. I'm Rabbi Philip Flip Rice. We are Congregation Micah. We welcome those virtually watching. As Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, sort of drifts from morning to afternoon, Jews worldwide listen to words of Torah again, really a haftarah, not half a Torah, a prophetical section of the text, the sacred scriptures. Prophets like Micah, Isaiah, Jeremiah. Today, we have asked two modern-day prophets to answer a few questions. In the year 586 before the Common Era, the Babylonians seized Jerusalem. And our ancestors laid down and they wept and they asked why. And the prophetical leadership of the time and the rabbis really afterwards explained that the Babylonians were an instrument of God. The same thing happened in the year 70 of the Common Era. When the Romans destroyed Jerusalem, the people of the time asked why, and the rabbis for centuries afterwards said that the Romans were an instrument of God. What they said was that they were being punished, the people, for losing their way, the way of humility. That they were being disciplined for casting justice aside, for straying from the path. So Micah, being our spiritual community, and its pursuit of justice, the prophet, the community, has met Noah, the prophet, and the organization known as Nashville Organized for Action and Hope. And this is an organization we would love even more representation in. They are anti-racist, they are faith-based, it is multiracial, it is multi-generational. You could see why Micah and Noah get along. It is comprised of congregations and community organizations that really work to amplify the power of ordinary people. It does not endorse political candidates, although we have two very polished politicians with us today, but it does get them to address issues. We have a Noah core team who is asking for your participation in representing Micah on issues throughout our city. Our subject this morning is one that we take pretty seriously in education, in Judaism, and that is education. Maybe I'll do this quickly. A rabbi and a doctor are chatting, and the doctor says, "You know, Rabbi, I treat a lot of my patients for free." And the rabbi says, "Oh, I do that." And the doctor says, "Well, you know, Rabbi, I often will give them the cheapest prescription, you know, just so." And the rabbi says, "I do that." And the rabbi says, "Well, you know, when I do surgery, because the surgery is often as expensive at the hospital, I waive my fee so that." And the rabbi says, "Oh, I do that." And the doctor says, "Rabbi, you don't have patients, you don't write prescriptions, and you don't perform surgery." And the rabbi says, "Oh, I say a lot of nice things about myself too." And I say that because we have two guests, and I'm going to say a few nice things about them so they don't have to say them about themselves. Dr. Bethina Naba McKinney is on the Metro School Board. She's representative for District 4, if that is correct. She's a Nashville public school parent. She is a former teacher and principal. We have a lot of respect for those titles here at Micah. She is founder and CEO of Naba Consulting, an educational consulting and management firm specializing in school improvement and turnaround work for schools and districts across the nation. She's lived in the Hermitage area, yes, for a couple of decades and has a number of children. She holds a master's in education from TSU and a doctorate in education from Tribeca. We are so honored that you are willing to spend a little time and answer some questions on education for us. Micah member, John Ray Clemens, now serving, I think, fourth term as a state representative for District 55 in the Tennessee General Assembly. You know, the Talmud has a lot of dissenting voices. He's one of the few, I think. He sits on the Civil Justice, Education Administration, and Health Committees. He serves as an officer on many boards and numerous community organizations and is a past statewide political director for the Tennessee Democratic Party. He's an attorney, he's a mediator. His son recently became an adult in the eyes of the Jewish community on this very pulpit under the leadership of Rabbi Lori Rice. So we are just honored to have the two of you with us today. I'm going to say a few nice things about this guy, too. Dave Zielinski is our legal advisor on our board. He has been a stalwart member. He has helped us not just legally, but with all sorts of issues in a variety of different ways. He is married to Arlene, and we're lucky to have both of you. And they are very active in our social action, along, I want to mention, with Avi Poster and Ron Hetty. These are people who are spearheading our work here, and we would love for more of you to be involved with it. Is that Betty Lickstein over there, too? She's in. and Kenny if you've not seen the video. Anyone who would like to get involved, we would love that. We need more representation from Micah at NOAA so that we can really help the marginalized and the people who need the most help. I'm going to turn this microphone over to Dave Zielinski, who's going to run our panel. I want to thank you all very much for being here.
Is this on? Can you hear me? Good. I don't have to push any buttons or anything. I'm new at this. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here, and also welcome to the folks listening at home. A lot is going on in Tennessee around public schools. The legislature passed a number of laws last year, and the governor has taken a number of measures, and we're going to be exploring some of those measures here this morning. We've kind of divided this up into 3 topics, and the first one is loosely organized around the question of who is deciding what books our kids will read in schools. The legislature last year passed a broad law that requires public schools to scrutinize their school library materials for, quote, age appropriateness, and to publish the full inventory for parents to view online. The Department of Education followed that up with instructions that the definition of school library includes all classroom books as well. The new law requires that a book can only be available in school if it is, quote, appropriate for the age and maturity levels of the students who may access the materials and is suitable for and consistent with the educational mission of the school. My first question is for John Ray, who we all know as John Ray, Representative Clemens. Do we know what this language means, and who is going to make these determinations?
Well, thank you. Thank you for hosting this, Rabbi Laurie, Rabbi Flip, and the entire congregation. I think the nicest thing you could have said about me was that I was smart enough to marry a beautiful Jewish lady who introduced me to this community. Well, to answer your question, the answer is we don't know what this means. It's purposely vague language for, those of us who practice law. You know how dangerous that can be when you have language like that. I think the important, parts of this is that they passed 2 bills regarding limiting access or editing the selection of books that you can have in a public school. And significantly, the governor of the state authored one, and the Speaker of the House of Representatives authored the other. And as most of you probably saw, when I asked the person who the Speaker handpicked to run his bill on the House floor what he would do with those books, he said he would burn them. That is the mentality and the environment in which I have the pleasure of serving, and the climate in which we all are living in the state of Tennessee. We can get to the bigger macro issue of the reason for all of this, I think, and we can go into that later. But, the real key words in that, and I think you may have detailed them, was the books, as vague as that language is, age appropriate. The key language in that bill, both bills actually, is that it must align with or be consistent with, quote, the educational mission of the school. And then when you see the types of schools that are trying to be introduced into the state of Tennessee, and you actually go on their websites or you look at what their educational mission is, that's what should really give you pause and really explains the purpose for the language. It's not the specific meaning necessarily about what you asked, but it is about this bigger objective that they're trying to accomplish, unfortunately.
Well, I have heard anecdotally that elementary school teachers, the first week of classes this year, and I believe one school district actually instructed its teachers to remove all your books from the classroom, first day of school, take them all out, no books in your classroom, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, until we've had an opportunity to screen these books. And I can't imagine, my child showing up at kindergarten where half your day consists of sitting in a circle and reading something or being read to without any books. Dr. Naba McKinney of Berthena, I have permission to call you, although I know the title of doctor is hard to come by. I've learned that from my wife. Berthena, what has the impact of this law been on teachers and administrators in the schools in your experience?
Thank you for the question, and thank you, Rabbi Rice's, Lori and Flip, for inviting me to your congregation. Also, happy Yom Kippur to you, as well for your holiday. And I understand that you all are fasting. The Muslim tradition are pros at fasting in that, so I understand what you are experiencing right now. And I pray your success in your fast and all that comes along with it. To answer your question, for MNPS, we have been fortunate within our district. I think across our state, there has been some experiences where districts have asked teachers to pull their reading materials. The instruction from our district has been more so making sure or ensuring that we are compliant with the law as it exists currently. We have not seen a big outcry from educators across our district about having to spend enormous amounts of time pulling reading material that does not reflect what the state has mandated across our district. We know that we have to take a closer look at that, but at this time, it hasn't been at a level of crisis that we have seen in some areas. And I think that that is reflective of who their school boards are and who the people are within their particular districts across the state. I will say, and I'm happy to say, that being recently elected, we are now an all-female board. So we can celebrate that, ladies in the audience, and gentlemen as well. And so I think our community and being a very diverse urban community, we are very reflective, ensuring that we are very inclusive of all students across our district. And so we want to be able to support that effort and that initiative while also trying to balance what our legislation has laid out for us. Thank you.
Here in the Jewish community, of course, I think most of us are familiar with the controversy that arose a little bit east of us earlier this year about the use of the book Mouse, the graphic novel by Art Spiegelman that won the Pulitzer Prize. Sure. The Mouse is the book by Art Spiegelman that won the Pulitzer Prize, the first graphic novel to ever win a Pulitzer Prize, that chronicles his parents' lives throughout the Holocaust and how that book was pulled from school. Some of us, I'm sure, are familiar with the controversy in neighboring counties here about the book Ruby Bridges Goes to School, which chronicles the story of the first child to integrate the New Orleans public schools. It's an autobiography by her that has been the product of controversy, I believe, in Williamson County. What is the process, Berthina, if a parent in Davidson County should decide that they find some material on the library list that's published objectionable? How is that going to work?
So the funny and interesting thing is there was recent legislation that was placed that allowed parents more input in having a say in the materials that were brought out. The reality is that law was already in place. Throughout time, any time that a parent questions any type of curriculum or books or conflicting books or controversial books, parents have a say in requesting or opting out their children in that curriculum or in those lessons that are being taught within the school district. So it is as simple as parents sending an email to the teacher saying, hey, I don't want, or I want to learn more information about what's being taught in this particular lesson or this particular book, and making a decision on whether their child can participate in it. If that decision is made, teachers are give students an alternative assignment that they can work through. And so that law has been in place. My oldest is 30 years old, and so it's been in place for as long as my children have been in school.
So the difference here appears to be that the legislature is actually trying to put some substance or riding some sort of momentum to deal with the actual substance, kind of across the board, rather than allowing parents and local school districts to make these decisions. John Ray, who or what is behind this that we've seen, not just in Tennessee, but in other states as well?
Well, what we're seeing, I mean, most of the things that happen in Tennessee didn't originate in Tennessee. The first few years I served at the legislature, every year I think, okay, well, they've passed a law on that topic. There's nothing else that can be done about that. You know, there's no other way to attack women's reproductive health care rights that hasn't been done. And then lo and behold, they would come back the next year and they'd have some new legal angle or bill to introduce. And I thought, man, these are the smartest, most creative people with whom I've ever served. Well, you know, I realize this is all coming from on high, and all of these issues and these bills that are being introduced in Tennessee are all focus grouped, poll tested, legally analyzed, you know, vetted from national organizations, fed into Tennessee. Our new school funding formula that was passed last year, within 6 months of being introduced, that was a national model. And so a lot of this stuff is coming from outside, and they know, I keep saying they, I should say, my colleagues know that they can score certain political points with certain issues. And it gets to, with education-related issues, whether it's textbooks, whether it's passing a bill about a law that actually really already exists. Parents already had the power to do what they were trying to scare them into believing they didn't have a power to do. All of that is going towards this larger issue of trying to reduce confidence in our public school system. There is a concerted effort nationwide, and it's really, you're seeing it play out in Tennessee on the micro level, this concerted effort to undermine our teachers and public schools. Because the less people have confidence in their public school system, the more they look for alternatives. And that's what the ultimate aim here is. And so you start hearing issues about teachers trying to, convert students. You start hearing crazy things like furries in committees like you heard last week. You start hearing about CRT. You start hearing about all of these issues that have no relevance, have not been an issue, have not shared concerns with local school board members. They're all designed because they're coming from on high. They're not coming from inside of Tennessee. There is no public outcry for these issues, but it's all kind of this overarching objective to reduce confidence in public education to achieve another purpose. And it's very disconcerting because, as was mentioned today, when we're thanking our teachers and the people who really have invested and committed themselves to educating our youth, there is no child or anyone for whom they have enough respect to say, okay, we won't go that far. Now everybody, I mean, there seems to be no limit to what will be done to achieve their overarching objective, which is to completely undermine teachers and the public school system. And that's very disconcerting. And now you see a lot of these individuals have been handpicked and placed on the very commissions that have final say over our textbooks. You've got questionable individuals on the textbook commission at the state level, the State Board of Education. You had an entire state charter commission handpicked and established to completely circumvent all locally elected leaders. And it is a very dangerous environment, and it is a structure that has been executed in a well thought out manner and very methodically and strategically over the better part of the last decade in the state of Tennessee.
I think that there is an illusion out there that some of these measures are aimed at empowering parents at the local level. Is that what either of you is really seeing with these measures that are happening with the state legislature, the bills that are being passed by our legislature? I'm sorry. Keep scolding me, Rabbi. Okay. Take my foot out and put this in my mouth, all right? Okay, thank you, Arlene. There is, I think, a certain illusion or myth that we hear, or at least a meme, that these are efforts to give parents a greater voice at the local level, and that these are efforts to empower parents. Is that what we're seeing? Is that what y'all believe is going on with these legislative efforts to change our public schools?
I really think it comes back to what John Ray was saying, that we are creating, we are having parents feel that they are not already empowered with the power to do the things that they can already do. And that's what we're seeing with our parents and within our community and with state legislators. Some of the legislation that has come across, some of the laws that have been enacted, sometimes in many cases are redundant because parents already have the means and the ability to have more say and a more active say in their lives. And so, for example, I have been both a principal and a teacher, and I don't know how many times I have reached out to parent to get parental support, because we know that research says that the more a parent is involved in a child's education, the more successful a child will be. And so that has always been an aim for educators across our community throughout generations to get parents more involved and more engaged in their child's education and their educational future.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is, I mean, you know, as the parent of 3 public school children here in Nashville, I think any parent who wants to be involved in their child's school knows that they can be. I think what you're starting to hear are just these exclamatory and hyperbolic kind of situational anecdotes or what have you, that a very vocal minority has raised up and tried to amplify what they're hearing on the national level at the local level. And so certain groups, and I'm trying to be on my best behavior, Rabbi, so I'm sorry. I'm up here, so I'm trying not to name names, and I'm really filtering myself here. But there are groups that represent what I would argue to be a vocal minority that have made their presence felt in Williamson County and other school systems across the state of Tennessee to amplify this false narrative that parents don't have a say and that they need a larger say. And most parents across the state of Tennessee are working, 1, 2, 3 jobs. They're doing everything they can to get their child fed and dressed and to school in the morning with the inability to actually get into the classroom and be involved. And they also don't have the ability to do their own research or to know how things really play out or know how a book goes from being challenged to being completely pulled out of a child's library. So what do they hear? They hear that very vocal minority and just assume that those are facts when in fact it's a false narrative. And so you're seeing politicians play off of that, unfortunately, rather than trying to educate and work with parents and let them know what power they do actually have. They're feeding into that and passing very harmful legislation on the back of that false narrative. And it's creating a very dangerous environment and one that's ultimately harmful to educational outcomes and our students.
Well, we're going to pile on the situation a little bit by moving on to another area of legislation. The legislature passed a new law last year that prohibits the teaching, well, not just the teaching, the teachings and the including of instructional materials that involve 14 concepts. And among these concepts that are prohibited are that an individual, by virtue of the individual's race or sex, is inherently privileged, racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or subconsciously, that an individual, by virtue of the individual's race or sex, bears responsibility for actions committed in the past by other members of the same race or sex, and that an individual should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or another form of psychological distress solely because of the individual's race or sex. It's fair to say at this point that both supporters and proponents have referred to this as the anti-CRT law, the CRT referring to critical race theory. Berthina, what is critical race theory, and why is this an issue for the state to address in our schools?
That's a great question. What is critical race theory? First of all, it is a legal theory at the graduate and law school level that discusses how society informs legislation and law across society. It is not a concept taught in our K-12 education. As a matter of fact, I didn't hear about it until it got brought up in the news and people started asking. So I had to do my own research about what critical race theory was and the intersection between critical race theory and K-12 education. I will say that it does not exist. It's not taught in school. It's not a concept that's taught in school. And so for K-12 educators, it's kind of a mute, made-up theory that incites, again, fear among families that something is existing that currently doesn't exist in our K-12 schools. I hope that.
So what is it, either of you, what is it that this legislation is aimed at? If this isn't taught in the public schools, and quite frankly, it wasn't taught in my law school either, what is this aimed at? John Ray?
Well, it goes back to what I was referencing earlier. It goes back to instilling a fear, a certain level of fear in the general population that this is, taking place in our public schools, and it's ultimately aimed to reduce confidence in our public school system and public education overall. And again, this piece of legislation that they called anti-CRT, but then on the House floor, when we questioned them about it, they said, oh, well, it doesn't say anything about critical race theory in it. It doesn't even use those words. And that's correct. But this bill was introduced, again, by the Speaker of the House of Representatives, arguably the second or third most powerful person in the state of Tennessee in elected office. And that is truly significant, and the message it is sending. And the language of this bill, which is now Public Chapter 818, says that the General Assembly finds that those concepts, which are deemed divisive concepts, exacerbate and inflame divisions based on the basis of sex, race, ethnicity, religion, color, national origin, and so on. And what the purpose of this is to completely hamstring or eliminate the discussion of certain aspects of our country's history and international history. Just the way that it's worded, you can't even discuss that at one point in our country, people thought that one race was superior to another. And if you're going to eliminate that whole discussion from a public education in grades K through 12, which it really doesn't even take place, let's eliminate K through 4 probably, you're cutting out a significant chunk of our nation's history and unfortunately present. And so the ultimate aim there was to whitewash history, whitewash social studies standards, and again, the double whammy and the win-win for the other side was to create this fear and gin up resentment and anger towards teachers, thus undermining them and our public education system, so that they could then come in with someone like Hillsdale and teach a curriculum that is completely whitewashed and misleading about the real aspects of our country's history. And some of the most important lessons I was ever taught were probably in 5th grade social studies and continuing throughout my public education until I went to college, where I became a history major for that very reason, was that if you do not learn your history, you are doomed to repeat it. And I think we all see us repeating the worst aspects of not only our nation's history, but international history. When we are talking about burning books on the House floor in 2022, I think it perfectly represents the fear that I have. And it is an unpleasant reality, but that is the direction in which we're heading for no good purpose other than to, again, it goes back to undermining our public education system. And if you look at history, again, who was attacking the educators? Who were attacking the academics? Who were burning books? We need to be cognizant of the language that is being used and the policies that are being passed by the individuals with the most power in our state. And this should concern and scare the living crap out of every one of us, quite honestly.
Members of the NOAA Education Task Force had an opportunity to meet last year while that legislation was pending with a fairly high-placed aide to Governor Lee, who was a former high school teacher here in Nashville, and who has written about his experience as a high school teacher and has written about having used Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail as teaching materials in his classroom. And we asked him in that meeting whether he would be able to use that material teaching a history class in high school today in Tennessee, given that Dr. King's letter refers specifically to privilege and racial divisiveness and all of those issues that we're all familiar with. And his answer was essentially, that's a good question, I don't know. Berthina, what is or what will the impact of this actually be in the classroom on our teachers?
I think that's a great question. Just to backtrack a little bit, when we talk about textbook selections and critical race theory, as well as your question adding here, I think it's also important to note I have 6 children, and my youngest is 8, and he actually read Ruby Bridges Goes to School, and when we read that book, that was in the height of the pandemic when all parents were at home. It was a 2nd grade curricular book that was introduced to the schools. So parents got a chance to see some of the types of books that students were reading within their schools. When my son and I read that book together, it's a historical book. It is a nonfiction informational text with that particular book. And to see his excitement of reading a book that had people who looked like him in the book, and to learn about their stories over time and where we are today, was very reflective for him as an 8-year-old black boy. And I think that goes to the heart of the impact that it not only will place on teachers, but on the students in which we serve. Davidson County, which is unique, we are the most diverse district in the state, right? And making sure that we have literature that reflects the students in which we serve is very important, not only to students' self-confidence, to improving literacy. The more a student can engage within a book and connect with a book, the more likely they will read it. And work to improve literacy across our district, across our state, which is something that's a challenge for our community. So I think, to answer your question, as we continue to, and if we continue to push along push along this legislation and continue to restrict it, that is where the challenge comes in, not only for teachers, but really for the children that we serve and their families. When students and children cannot show up and feel known and seen and feel a part of a community in which they are contributing to, it creates a dynamic that is less serving to those children and family than it should be. And so that is the ultimate bigger picture that we really need to look at as we're educating children, as we are participating with family, and as we're creating community across our city. Thank you.
If I'm a teacher, and just to kind of go back again to Ruby Bridges, the objection on record in Williamson County to the book Ruby Bridges Goes to School was that it showed pictures of angry white people holding signs up as this child entered public school, and that the curriculum around teaching the book included vocabulary learning of words such as injustice, unequal, inequality, protest, marching, and segregation as part of grammar lessons. And that was the objection. If I'm a teacher in Tennessee, how am I going to teach anything about our racial history if I know that parents are going to be trying to sanitize just the depiction, the factual depiction of that history?
I think it comes back to what John Ray had mentioned earlier. If we don't learn about our history, we are doomed to repeat it. And so, I'm sorry about that. And so, as a community, I think it's important that we understand our history, good or bad. Our history is it is what it is. The good parts of our history and the not so good parts of our history. But I think it's relevant. I think it's important that we share that, and that our students are learning that they are our future. And if we want to continue to make our future brighter, this is the way that we go about creating a better future for everyone.
So I can't imagine being a teacher right now, quite honestly. For those of you who are educators and teachers, I thank you. You not only impacted my life in a positive manner, you impact my children's lives and everyone in here's lives in a positive way. But if I'm a teacher today, I am basically living in fear. And I think that's the ultimate goal, is to make teachers so afraid to teach anything other than what they are given and what is put in front of them by a hand-picked group of people from on high. What are we doing to our education system? How valuable is our education system going to be? And again, I think going back to creating a climate of fear for educators is part of this overall objective to reduce confidence in our public education system and undermine the teaching profession in our public schools. And so that's the ultimate aim. And I've heard them say it. We want teachers too scared to teach anything because they're so concerned. I mean, they are convinced, some of them aren't. Some of them are just doing it for political purposes. But some of them really believe that children are being indoctrinated by public school teachers. And so they are passing laws that we have discussed where who is most qualified, who is trained to choose which textbooks to put in front of a child, who is trained to select and decide which library books should go in the library for K through 5th grade or 9th through 12th grade. These are people who are specifically trained for years. Our teachers, our librarians, our school counselors, the people who know and who are in the building, who know what children need, what they respond to, what's effective, and what actually, lo and behold, educates them. So now you've created this climate of fear where teachers can't use the skills that they were trained to utilize and that they were trained with. And so you are just completely limiting the value and the most productive part of an educator's system, a public education system, by really drawing these narrow lines that they want teachers to be too afraid to step out of. And they put in here, teachers can be accused, teachers can be held accountable, taken to the school board, they can be punished and disciplined. And these are educators. These are public school teachers, the most important people in most of our lives, being taken and basically dragged before an unelected body and to decide what they did or didn't do was accurate or inaccurate, and that they shouldn't have used the skills that they were trained to use. That is, again, I can't emphasize how dangerous this is. And then even more dangerous when you look at the people that have been handpicked to serve on these bodies that are making these decisions. These are not elected individuals like this qualified woman and her colleagues. These are people who, let's just be honest. One of them has been, runs an organization that's been identified as an anti-Muslim hate group. These are the type of people that are being handpicked by the highest leaders in the state government. This is dangerous, and ultimately, we need to educate ourselves and rally around our teachers, because right now they're only hearing from the people, that vocal minority. The rest of us need to band together and wrap our arms around our teachers and protect them, because they deserve it, they've earned it, and they do it every single day.
Very quickly, we will take questions at the end, but yes. I'll remember you when we get there.
Okay, so I'm teaching 8th grade English in Williamson County, and we start a unit on the Holocaust. So we had to send a letter home. I said, I'm teaching 8th grade English in Williamson County. We're starting a unit on the Holocaust. So we sent a letter home to all the parents that detailed step by step everything we were going to do in this unit. And when I handed it out, I told the students, I said, because, you know, they'll leave it on the desk, they'll put it in their backpack, the parents will never see it. I said, this is really important because if your parents do not want you to participate in this unit, we need to know now, not 2 weeks from now, so that we can plan something else for you, because we have to do that. A few years ago, the last year maybe, when we were allowed to teach To Kill a Mockingbird, we had to give kids the option, and a whole bunch of kids had to read a different book. This is what's happened now. So, but we're even when we're going by the textbook now, we're scared. And there is an excerpt, one of the excerpts, we are going to read 2 acts of Diary of Anne Frank. There's an excerpt from Mouse, which I guess we're not going to do. And I had said, well, could I go on and bring in my copy of Mouse just to show them this is, you know, a graphic novel, and so the librarian quickly researched to see if any of the libraries in Williamson County schools had the book, and some of the high schools had it, 4 middle schools had it. She said, you better go ask the principal. So I saw the principal later. I said, hey, you know, this is what happened. Would it be okay if I brought in my book just to show the kids? And she said, absolutely not. She said 3 of the worst problem makers in Williamson County have children in our school, and she said one of them's in your class. Now, I don't know who it is, but she said, don't do anything that isn't exactly, you know, by the book. And that's a situation that we're in Williamson County.
Well, I know you didn't ask a question, but the only thing I would ask everyone to remember is the Holocaust is a divisive concept under the statute that was passed. That, just to give you some context about what has been prohibited. And it's going to be interesting as to whether or not they prohibit the teaching of the Holocaust, ultimately, because it is a divisive concept under the statute as it's written. So that's just something to keep in mind, and it's a perfect example of the climate of fear that has been created by all of these laws to respond to, again, a vocal minority.
And I think even prior to the Holocaust, there was controversy around Islam and how Islam was taught. And history standards were revised and changed as a result of how they wanted Islam to be taught within schools. And so we are continuing to see history repeat, not just for Muslims, also for our Jewish community, and it will continue as you continue to see those changes exist.
John Ray mentioned school textbooks and how those are approved in Tennessee. And, you know, one of the members of the School Text Board Commission fought the mosque in Murfreesboro and has said some very extreme things, not only about Islam, but is also about the last presidential election. And she's a political appointee on the state's textbook commission, who was recently renewed for another term on that commission. There's also, you know, the state law mandates that subject curricula be revised or reviewed and revised every few years. And this year, social studies is on the agenda, and it's being reviewed and revised as we speak. And that's done by the school board, listens to advisory committees, and the state school board, of course, is composed of appointees by the governor and by the state legislature. Should we be concerned, and can we be involved in what is going on right now with the revision of the state's social study curricula standards in Tennessee?
Yes, you could have been involved. Right now, it's at the phase where there is no longer public comment. The state website, if you go to the Social Studies Review Committee website, it refers to itself as a highly transparent and comprehensive review process. So how many of you in this room, just by a show of hands, knew that there was a public comment period for the social studies standard in the state of Tennessee this summer? So 2, because Abby knows everything. But that's the reality. The bulk of Tennesseans who care about this don't know. And unless you really know where to look on the Department of Education website, and that those were even taking place, and that there was even a public comment period to participate in, you didn't participate. I mean, that's the reality of it. And I will say that yesterday I'd seen mention that this might be discussed. Rabbi Flip sent a email earlier this week, and so I called the Department of Education and the Social Studies Review Committee and asked them, because their website says feedback from the initial public review period will inform the work of expert educator teams that will propose revisions to the social studies standards the week of September 12th, 2022. So I called them and asked them what those revisions would be. They refused to provide them to me yesterday as a sitting legislator. And they gave me a whole bunch of, hoopla about why they weren't ready yet. But that's the reality. The rules are kind of being made up as they go. If the process isn't done, the process isn't done. I understand that. And it should be a complicated process. It should take a while. It shouldn't be done, in a 6-month time period. This is something that you really should think out and seek the input of educators and people who are actually in the classrooms. But those new standards are coming, and again, I think we should all be very concerned about because they claim that they collected 114,500 comments during the comment period. I don't know who those individuals were, but I can rest assured that certain groups that have a very specific interest in whitewashing social studies could very possibly mass email their select group on their email list and had them flood the system, while the rest of Tennessee was ignorant to the process. So I would brace yourselves.
To add to that, I think another way to stay informed and stay involved with the Tennessee Department of Education, if you're on social media, I would like their websites to make sure that you're informed about, because those are public posts. And they were posted online. Not a lot of people who are in tune with the Tennessee Department of Education or connected to them would know that they were posted online, but they were. But I, as a community, anyone that has children in our K-12 education system need to be in tune, or any community member who is passionate and want to get connected with what they're doing in the state around education. I would encourage you to go onto their social media and make sure that you are liking it, signing up for their newsletters so that you're getting their letters regularly, so that you stay informed and stay involved with what's coming down the pipeline. Sometimes you will find things that are sent out in a timely manner, and other times you'll find things that are sent out last minute. But you will be informed and you will know what's coming down the pipeline if you're connected in that sort of way. And so I encourage all families and community members who care about what's happening in our K-12 system to get involved and to stay connected. Thank you.
The subject of charter schools obviously has been in the news lately. Back in February, Governor Lee announced that he wanted to partner with the Hillsdale College to start 50 charter schools in Tennessee. He's since upped that to 100 in other comments. Hillsdale College is a private Christian college located in Michigan, which has been the driving force behind a K-12 curriculum based largely on American exceptionalism. Hillsdale's president, Larry Arnn, was the leader of the Trump administration's 1776 commission, which was created to rebut the 1619 project. Mr. Arnn was recently in the news when he stated that teachers are trained, this is a quote, in the dumbest parts of the dumbest colleges in the country. 3 of the Hillsdale charter schools applied for charters in Tennessee. All 3 were rejected by their local school districts, those Madison County, Rutherford County, and Montgomery County. They appealed to the State Charter School Commission, but last week all 3 withdrew their appeals. Although the president of Hillsdale, I believe, has announced that they will take another run at it when they review the criticism that they've gotten through their appeal process. Berthina, my first question is very basic. How do charter schools differ from traditional public schools?
I was trying to hand that off to John Ray. So the difference between our charter schools and our traditional public schools, one, charter schools are basically a charter, an agreement with the public school district or the local education agency or the State Department of Education to charter a new school. What that means is that our charter schools have they're nonprofit organizations in the state. They have their own governing board. They are run independently, so they are basically, as many would say, a private public school. They're publicly funded but privately run schools. So they have the autonomy to select the curriculum of their choice, the teaching style within their school, and the autonomy to basically educate their children in the model in which they applied for within their charter. And so the difference between them is our director of schools, Dr. Adrian Battle, has no oversight on how our charter schools run within their particular schools. The common denominator between our local public schools and our charter schools is funding.
John Ray, how does the funding work with charter schools?
Well, they take what they want, and the LEA doesn't have much to say about it. Now, it actually works different under the new funding formula. So TISA is the new funding model that was rammed through this past legislative session. Again, it was a boilerplate piece of legislation that was tied into Nashville, or Tennessee rather, which did a lot of harm to Nashville budgetary-wise. But ultimately, the aim of that bill was that you heard a lot of talk about the money will travel with the student. Well, what that means is every student that goes to a private school, every student that goes to a charter school or outside the school system, whatever amount of money that is attributable to that student based on the base funding amount, which was approximately $6,860 per student, then in addition to the weights, whether they had a special learning disability or some other factor. If they were living in a rural county, they got an additional weight of money. If they lived in a sparse district, there was an additional pot of money. And that money would travel with that child outside of that public school to whichever school they chose. There are a lot of holes in the legislation. The legislation was passed based on two false narratives. One was that it was the alternative to the BEP, which it wasn't. The BEP was never fully funded. In fact, Tasser said the BEP was underfunded, approximately $1.7 billion per year by the state of Tennessee. And so it was portrayed as the only viable alternative to the failing BEP. Well, the other option there was to actually do the work ourselves, bring in thought leaders, educators, people who are actually in the classroom and in the school system, school board members, and design a funding formula that works for Tennessee, a true Tennessee plan. That was never considered. The other false narrative was that this TISA funding formula was going to result in an additional $1 billion per year into public education. Well, first of all, an extra $1 billion is insufficient as a one-time thing. When we were underfunding the formula before the BEP by $1.7 billion per year. So that was also a false narrative. There was no dollar amount anywhere in the bill of the funding formula. There is no dollar amount associated with outcome incentive goals that could take additional monies. And what you also need to know is there is a direct allocation line item for charter schools in the new funding formula. So they could say, well, if every child gets $6,860, they can get X amount of dollars per weight for learning disability or rural county. We can put $10,000 additional on this child if they go to a charter school. So it has basically created a mechanism to funnel money outside of our traditional public schools into charters or private schools. And and she referred to nonprofits, and that's where the real trick is. A lot of these schools are real estate investment trusts. A lot of them have different profit-making motives or abilities or capabilities that run counter to the actual law. State law considers charters public schools, but they are, I would argue they're anything but in the way that they actually operate with the additional flexibility they have and lack of regulation they have. By Dr. Battle, for instance, it is a very, we have created, again, a very dangerous mechanism here with the chief funding formula for the state of Tennessee that allows more money to be drained out of our public school system, again, fueling this overarching objective to reduce confidence in public schools. Because if your public schools aren't performing right now, a lot of it is because your teachers don't have the resources they need to do their job. And so if you take even more resources away from those schools, they're going to even be less and less are able to perform the jobs and the many requirements we put on their shoulders, our unfunded mandates, which makes other schools, private schools, charter schools, much more attractive because now they're receiving more money with more resources and less regulation.
To add to that, currently as where TISA sits, Nashville, Davidson County, Metro Nashville Public Schools is expected to get the lowest allocation out of the however many counties across our state. 147, other 146 next to Sevierville. And so if we're looking at this funding mechanism, Davidson County is already an underfunded district. We are also a very complex district. And so being set up to receive one of the lowest, if not the lowest, allocation of any of the other 146, total 147 districts across our state is also not a good thing for Nashville and the students in which we serve.
Especially given that we are the second largest district in the state of Tennessee outside of Shelby County.
Say that one more time.
We are the second largest district in the state of Tennessee, with the exception of Shelby County, Memphis City, that were forced to join together 10 years ago, who have now become the largest district. We are the first and second largest urban districts of the state, serving some of the most underserved population of all ethnicity. And I can speak to that because I teach in one of those schools in Nashville, right on Jefferson Road.
Who decides if there's a charter school that's going to open up in Nashville? We've got something like 27, I believe, charter schools in Nashville. Who makes that decision?
Well, ultimately, they file an application. The local board reviews the application and can make the decision, and that's how it started, and that's how it should have stayed. Now, unfortunately, again, they've done this piecemeal with various puzzle pieces, and so as it sits today, a state charter commission can review an appeal from, let's say, Hillsdale. We're all familiar with that. They applied in Rutherford County. Rutherford County rejected it for multiple reasons, their application. And then so they appealed that to the State Charter Commission. Well, the State Charter Commission has been handpicked by Governor Bill Lee completely at this point. It's completely full of people who are on the boards of or members of charter schools, one of whom is gets paid over $200,000 per year just to consult for SCORE, which is the money funnel into the state of Tennessee for the charter organizations. SCORE. And so she gets paid by them. There's another one, there's two that sit on the board of SCORE, and all of them are tied with charter schools. They have the ability to override our local school boards and completely take all local control, local regulation, and decision-making off the board. And so what you saw, and what you continue to see with these applications is, so when Hillsdale wrote their application, they didn't write that application and apply for all the pages of waivers for the Rutherford County School Board. That wasn't their ultimate audience. Their audience that they wrote that application and those waivers for was for the State Charter Commission that they control. So they knew they were going to be rejected at the local level because the local level, in fact, doesn't even have legal authority to waive teacher requirements, teacher pay scale, all these different things that they sought waiver for in their application. If you go to the application for Hillsdale, turn to page 166 where the waivers start, and just look at the list of waivers that they're seeking for teacher qualifications, administrative qualifications, pay scale, any number of things. And so their ultimate audience is that hand-picked board at the state that can come in and trump the decision of any local organization or locally elected school officials.
We're going to be running out of time here in a few minutes.
We have like more than 20 some minutes.
Okay.
We can take some questions.
I'm not worth it. Okay. I'm from Chicago, so no expert on Tennessee schools, but knowing Chicago schools, which I went to grammar school and high school, the schools have deteriorated. So you could say in reaction to that, there's more action now on charter schools, etc. There are reasons for this reaction going on, and I think it's important to at least keep that in mind. The issue on the textbooks, there's also some reaction to some feelings that there's overreaction to guilt or, as you said, regarding racial theory and this and that. So these are coming from somewhere. It's not just a cabal on a few people that are trying to upset the public school system. I don't think that's a fair characterization. So that's just my 2 cents. I think it's worth at least keeping that in mind. It comes from somewhere. It doesn't come from nowhere.
Well, I think to respond to that, I think if you look at the original intent of charter schools were to be experiments and basically laboratories for education outside of the traditional public schools. And then you could take that select group of charter schools and apply those principles and teaching methods that worked in that charter school, which was an agreement among the parents and the school itself to allow their children to kind of be in that laboratory of learning, and then apply those into the public education system. Well, the problem took place when people started thinking, oh, wait, we can use these charter schools for other reasons. We can use them if we have a religious agenda, if we have, if we can make money on a real estate investment. They figured out ways to manipulate the system and take what originally probably was fairly considered a good idea. And even I had little to no opposition to them when they first started because they were a limited laboratory of learning. But now they have taken on wildfire status in Nashville specifically, Memphis specifically, and now across the state of Tennessee. So the original intent has really been manipulated and is being manipulated by those in control at the state level, and I've seen it play out over the last 8 years, evolve completely. You got to remember, the door was opened to this by President Obama himself with the Race to the Top. Mayor Carl Dean was a big supporter of the State Charter Commission, originally as formed. This isn't a partisan issue. This is something that has been manipulated and evolved over time to create a real situation, financial specifically, because of the amount of money that is being pulled out of LEAs that now have no longer have any say in the authorization of that charter, but now they're responsible for giving a huge chunk of their annual budget to those charters over which they have no regulatory control whatsoever. So when you start to see schools deteriorate and you start to see the paint chipping on the walls and the building and the facilities, that's because those dollars aren't accounted for in the funding models that are being used, because that money's traveling with these children into a privately owned facility that's a real estate investment trust. And those other children, there's always children left behind. And I can give you 2 guesses who those children generally are. And you're seeing it play out in the state of Tennessee. And so that's the real problem. And now you're really, these policies are taking what was originally a good idea and a way to develop new learning methods, and they've turned it into something wholly different. And now they're coming back around and trying to reduce confidence in those public schools in multiple ways to make those the better option and the only option. And it's not for the right reasons in most cases. I will say there are good charter schools in this city and across the state of Tennessee. I openly admit that. And the people even working, I visited one this past week, the people working in charter schools that are failing or considered failing by the state of Tennessee standards are good people doing the best they can. But that doesn't mean that system is working or it is in the best benefit for the children. And that's what's creating the rub and the real problem here.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump in here before you do, Berthina, too. The funding part of this is also critical, but NOAA takes no position on charters versus traditional public schools. The issue, as far as we're concerned, is one of local control versus state control. So we now have a situation in which your local charter schools are now under state control, and the funding that the local charter school receives comes out of your local funding. There's a reason why there's been a general uproar around the state to the Hillsdale schools. It's not just confined to Nashville or Memphis, and that is because most of the state of Tennessee doesn't want charters in their districts. They don't want in a rural county to have 2 high schools being funded by local funds just because Governor Lee wants a particular curriculum being taught in their schools. You know, the polling in Tennessee has been pretty overwhelming for a long time. People in Tennessee love their public schools, and that is throughout the state. So the question is not whether changes are necessary. The question is who is seeing these changes as an opportunity to enact different agendas from what is necessarily best for our students. Berthina?
Yeah, and I just want to add on to John Ray's comment. How many of you, Nashville Public Education Foundation put out a documentary called By Design. How many of you have seen that documentary? If you have not, I would encourage all of you, you can pull it up on YouTube now, it's widely available, but it talks about the history of public education here in Nashville, Tennessee. And I would encourage each and every one of you to look at that documentary to see where Nashville public school system started and how they got to where they are today, and how legislation and government and individuals made decisions that were sometimes in the best interests of themselves as opposed to best interests of the community at large. And so I recommend that you really look at that. I think another thing to add on to how we're having this discussion, a lot of times when legislation is made, whether it's charter schools or now currently we're doing voucher systems where funding can go to private schools and private faith-based schools coming out of public dollars that would ultimately go to or be taken away from our public school system. If you look at the most recent legislation around our voucher system, if you notice, we are currently, it was currently designed and designed in the wrong way to only be set for Nashville, Davidson County, and Memphis. And legislators who voted for this policy said, I will vote for it as long as you don't bring it into my school district and my county and my community. And so this is some of the impact that continues to happen across our state and that is impacting also right here in Nashville and Davidson County, as well as Memphis city schools. And so the idea of charter, again, as he mentioned, it was designed to be an innovative hub where schools were allowed to create, do innovative projects and learning methods within schools that we could bring back and partner with our public schools to bring that level of innovation back in our schools. That has since shifted. And anytime you have a situation where local control, where the removal of local control happens, it's problematic, and everybody should be questioning why we are removing local control. So we are elected officials, we are represented by our communities, we are voted in by our communities, but we ultimately have no say on whether a charter school should exist, should it be revoked, should it be started, or anything, because anytime we make a decision now, that decision can be appealed to our Tennessee Charter Commission, an appointed board, not an elected board, an appointed board by the governor, and sometimes that is not, in most cases, is not in the best interest in the communities in which it serves. And that decision is final. So if a charter commission decides to not uphold the LEA's decision, that decision is final, and there can be no appeal to that decision. And so if we're saying, for financial reasons, for whatever reasons, we don't need, or we don't need a charter school within our district, or that charter application is not a solid charter application, and we deny that 9.9 times out of 10, that decision is overruled by us. And so we have to begin to question why this is the case and why this continues to happen. Thank you.
So here's an easy question. What can we do about this? As parents, what can we do about any of these changes, or what's coming down the pike that we should be looking for, that we can do something about?
Well, this is probably the most common question that I'm asked. What can we do? And then the number one thing you can do is vote, obviously. But it's staying informed and sharing and educating your friends, your family, your peers, others about what is really happening. Because the reality is most people in the state of Tennessee aren't spending their Wednesday afternoon listening to a roundtable discussion about what's going on in our education system. They are living their life. They're doing a million other things, working. And so the more information you can share from trusted sources with your friends and family, the better. I find that the more people are informed and educated, the more response we have to anything that's taking place in the state capitol. Next thing I would ask you to do is build a relationship with your elected officials. Know your school board members, know your council members, know your state legislators. And that's very easy because while we're all very busy just like you are, no one who's ever called and asked me out to coffee has been rejected. And it's probably the same for the doctor. Get to know your elected officials because you have expertise in one area or another more than you probably realize. So if you're a school teacher, I substitute taught 5th grade 20 years ago, but I don't know what's going on in classrooms. I don't know the challenges teachers face on a daily basis. I'm on the health committee. I've never performed an operation. So when policy comes before me, it may look great on paper, but who do I call and who do I seek out information from and input? Experts. So before I take a vote on the K-12 Education Committee about some specific issue, I call my friends who are teachers. And that's because a lot of them have reached out to me and built a friendship up with me so I know who I can reach out to, who I know is willing and educated to tell me what's going on. If I have a health policy issue, I'll call, one of my friends who's actual doctor working in a clinic to provide me input from what's going on. So I say all that to say, stay informed and get to know those who are representing you so that you become a reliable source for them and trusted source of information for them to make better decisions. Because right now, a lot of legislators are only hearing from that vocal minority. They only respond and react to what they're seeing on the nightly news or in Washington, D.C., or, the crowd that shows up to the school board meetings. Because the entire rest of the population that knows better, that knows that burning books is a bad idea, didn't take the time to show up because they thought, well, who's going to vote for burning books? Well, surprise. So get to know your legislators, stay on them, build relationships, and please share information. And then, of course, drive 10 people to vote with you every time you go vote because the voting turnout in Tennessee is abysmal. Doctor, you can fill in the rest.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I agree, voting is number one, making sure that you're getting out to vote. But as a school board rep, I would love to see parents get involved. Get involved with your children's PTOs, PTAs. We also have a district level parent advisory council for you to get involved with. Connect with me as a school board member and as your other school board members across our district. Get involved, make relationships, and stay informed. Also, as a community member, volunteer within our schools. We need volunteers within our schools. The Pencil Foundation is our liaison that really helps to empower and build community participation and community advocacy towards our public school system. So become a community volunteer, bring your organization as a community volunteer, and get involved within our schools and help make an impact that way as well. And then stay informed, again, with the Tennessee Department of Education, with your local school district. Any way that you can become involved as an active community member or a parent, I encourage you to do so. And support your teachers, because they're on the ground. every day, and become true partners with them in the work that they are doing to support your children. Thank you.
We have time for maybe 2 quick questions if anyone is just dying to spring something on John Ray or Bethina.
So my question is separation of church and state with this Hillsdale College. And it seems like it's coming also from a national level and drilling down. Do you guys bring that up in the legislature that, Hillsdale College, you got to get back there. We can't, mesh these two things together. What's going on with that? I don't hear anything about separation of church and state.
Yes, but as Rabbi Flip said earlier, there are a few voices of opposition in the state legislature, so I generally get drowned out. But yeah, you can rest assured that that is a big issue. And it certainly, I think the last time there was a really significant debate about that issue was the voucher bill. And for obvious reasons. It's those types of discussions, that is a very detailed, significant legal debate, constitutional debate to have. Unfortunately, those don't take place very often in committees. When John Ray tries to, bring up separation of church and state to committee, I get gavelled down straight away. That's it. That's in a discussion. Move past the bill, and that's unfortunate because that is and should be a serious concern. Just as the Second Amendment often is brought up, certain parts of the Constitution like to be ignored, unfortunately. But yes, that is discussed very often, and but not in as depth and as detail as you would expect and fairly expect from legislators.
Very quickly.
Hi, I'm wondering how you all are seeing these conversations impact kids who have disabilities, who are getting services either through the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act or Section 504, because most of the conversations that I'm hearing, it seems like those young people aren't really part of the discussion, whether it has to be with regard to inclusion and diversity and equity. They seem to be put to the side. And I'm really concerned about that because I feel that, our responsibility is to educate all children.
Great question. There's actually a lot more work than probably is publicized around students with disabilities. It is a federal mandate. It is something that has to be upheld across our districts within every school in the K-12 spectrum. Even with the new TISA funding framework, whether you agree or disagree with it, there has been work for weights to ensure that more funding is allocated to students with disabilities depending on their level of disability and their need. And so that is work that is continually being done. However, on the flip side, we have a crisis around special education teachers. And we also have a crisis of teachers actually going into the field of education now for many reasons, right? And so I think that's where you're beginning to see the challenge is having the adequate number of special education teachers and paraprofessionals who support our students with disabilities to be able to carry out the support, the services effectively. And so I think we're talking about maybe two different conversations. Funding allocation as well as teacher shortage within those communities to be able to support students. But there's a lot of intentional work being done around that to support it.
I want to thank John Ray and Berthina for being here today. they are very accessible, and so if you have any questions or any comments or any concerns, please do reach out to them. I know that everyone that we at NOAA talk to about how to influence public policy says your elected representatives do read your emails. They do listen to voicemail. They will call you back. They will meet with you. And that has been our experience with both Berthina and with John Ray. Arlene has a few comments that she wants to say.
Hi, so this is a plug to get involved. This is a plug to get involved with NOAA. You've heard a bit about it. I want to add to what Rabbi Flip mentioned when he described it as being interfaith, anti-racist, nonpartisan. It's also grassroots, and there is power in numbers. NOAA has over 60 member organizations. These are 3 synagogues, the Jewish Federation, churches, mosques, unions, and other nonprofit social justice organizations. So education is one of the issues that NOAA decided about 4 years ago that it wanted to focus on. The others in which it is currently involved are criminal justice reform, affordable housing, job equity, and also voter engagement. It's grassroots. When we meet together probably in a few years to decide how we want to move forward, we all decide what issues matter to us. And when these task forces form, it's the members of the task forces that decide what issues matter. So if you want to amplify your voice, NOAA is a great way to do it. I jotted down when John Ray and Berthina were talking about how to get involved, right? Stay informed. NOAA will keep you informed. Build relationships with elected officials. That's what we do. So I want to make a plug now for NOAA's public meeting on Sunday. It's this Sunday, October 9th. And Rabbi Flip's actually going to be giving one of the opening prayers. We're trying to get 500 people there. About 10 of us are already going from Micah. We would love to have more. At this public meeting, the mayor is going to be there. Other elected officials will be there. And this is where we say to them, will you make a commitment to make the changes that we want to make in order to build what we're calling it this year, a beloved community, in order to make Nashville a city that works for everybody and not just for those with resources. If you are interested in coming to the public meeting, please just come up, give me your phone number or your email, and I will send you the information. Register as a member of Congregation Micah. And then just quickly, we are also trying to organize to get people out to vote, and we are going to do the voter commitment we did 2 years ago and try to get everybody in our congregation to agree to vote. And I'm going to follow up again and say, and get 10 people you know to make the commitment as well. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you. NOAA, yes.
Micah loves NOAA. I want to thank not just our panelists again, but Dave Zielinski for running it and our entire core team. One more round of applause for everybody. I want to thank you all for being here and not only encourage you to get involved with NOAA, but any of the other number of programs we're offering. It's beautiful out if you want to spend a little time outside. In a couple of minutes here, there will be a Schmooze and Views conversation. There's also healing service taking place with Rabbi Laurie and Cantor Josh in the chapel. And I wish you to have a continued Tzom Kal, an easy fast. Thanks for being with us.